Hey, what's up, folks? We have a special guest for you today and a great show. IRS data shows that New York and California lost over $90 billion in income to low state taxes during COVID. We're going to talk about it. North Korea is elected to the World Health Organization Executive Board. Wow. I wrote an article about Hulk Hogan on an MMA podcast talking about how pharmaceuticals put him in a 10-year fog where he couldn't remember his name, couldn't remember the name of his dogs, and how he broke away from the pharmaceutical stranglehold that they had on him to get healthier. It's a really incredible story that I'm trying to help break to the public. And lastly, we're going to talk about RFK Jr., who's giving Joe Biden a run for his money, and with my special guest Pete Parada, a professional musician who was fired from The Offspring for not taking the vaccine. We had a great chat before, and I enjoyed his take so much, I invited him back for today's show. God bless you guys. Welcome to the Dream Rare Podcast. Show starts now. It's the Dream Rare Podcast. Welcome to the show. The way to get the news at the desk or on the road. Let's go. God is... What's going on, everybody? Welcome to today's episode of the Dream Rare Podcast. I'm here with Pete Parada. He's back for a second time to weigh in on some stories. What's up, Pete?
Hey, good to see you again. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, dude, I loved your perspective on everything. So we're just going to crack out some stories, and I want to get your take on it. And the first one of the day, I'll just start with it real quick as people are coming in. CNBC reported, based off of the IRS data, that New York and California as states lost over $90 billion in income taxes to low tax states during COVID. So I'm just going to read a few key points that the article says. New York and California lost over $90 billion in income during COVID, according to the new IRS data. It accelerated the trend of high earners relocating to lower tax states like Florida and Texas. The income losses for California and New York in 2021 were more than 3 times their combined losses in 2019 before the pandemic took hold in the US. So the numbers of the battles between states and how to handle it are finally coming in. And not to dunk on him again, but as Trump is trying to paint this picture that Florida did worse than COVID with COVID deaths, you know, the data of the economics is coming out, and it's 90 billion that they lost because they locked down harder.
Yeah, it's tough to argue that, you know, Florida did a worse job than California or New York. I know that, you know, Trump's been saying that, and Newsom's been running around trying to dunk on DeSantis, but you know, people put their money where their mouth is and have been moving. You know, my family, when COVID hit, you know, you feel like, oh, we can't see anyone. We live in Tennessee, and we were thinking of moving. I'm from New York, my wife's from California, and we were like, oh, maybe we should move closer to where we have family, and quickly realized we weren't going to be allowed to almost exist in either of those states. You know, if we go to New York, for quite a while, we wouldn't have been able to go to a restaurant. We wouldn't be able to take part in, you know, the regular things without your vaccine card, you know. So, and then Tennessee opened up pretty quick. So it was very different at the time living here. And then I was still going to LA to do some work in early 2021. And it was like a war zone out there, people driving alone in their cars with masks on. But back here, everybody's out eating dinner, going to bars, you know, going about their business. It was just 2 completely different scenarios happening, you know, depending on who was in charge of the state. And it was just really kind of sad and depressing to see what was happening in California while people were just kind of living their lives and going about their business here in Tennessee.
Yeah, and I think this is some actually optimistic and good news. I mean, I'm not trying to dunk on 2 complete states and be like, haha, you're losing money, but
Right.
really they deserve it because, you know, I moved from LA County to a conservative county during COVID. I was like, I can't live here. Why would I did a show, I did Sturgis in 2020 in South Dakota, and it was completely open. And then when I got back to California, it's like, why do I even live in this state? You know, I was considering moving there somewhere open because it's just totally different planets. But the fact that they lost so much money, you know, this will speak to their policy. And although they're gaslighting for elections and legacy purposes, I think they see the type of economic damage they did to their state. And we've always said this, and some conservatives, at least, or libertarians, have always said, you can raise taxes on the wealthy in your state. It's an interesting concept, right? As somebody that doesn't have $1 billion to say, hey, we're going to tax you 90, 80% or whatever, but they don't have to, not only do they not have to stay in the state, they don't have to stay in the country. So, you know, you want to do a balance of, you don't want to chase all the wealthy people and corporations away, because then who's there left to take the money? It's going to be the lower class and the middle class. And that's one thing I found when I remember I liked Bernie against Hillary, and he was talking about healthcare, and I'm like, and then I realized in California that they forced me to buy healthcare that I didn't want, and I had no money, and it was like 4,000, 5,000 a year, which was a lot for me. And I was like, wait, why am I paying for this? I thought it was free. And that's where kind of the concept boils down is people don't have to stay in the States, and they didn't, and they lost $90 billion.
Yeah, I mean, people just decided I don't want to be here anymore. We had an influx of, I mean, because Nashville is a very big touristy town. People come here to party, and even through the summer of 2021, you keep talking to people coming through town, and they're like, show up with their mask on, and they're looking for permission to, and it's like, no, you don't have to do that here. Like you get to enjoy themselves, and by the end of the weekend, they're just having the best time, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to go back to where I've got a mask up and everybody's afraid and nobody goes out. And I think a lot of people were like, yeah, like you said, you went to Sturgis, and then when you get back to California, you're like, this doesn't feel right at all. Like, I don't
Right.
want to live like this. And I think when people were traveling again, it opened their eyes. When you went back to a state that was still pretty locked down, you realize that that wasn't a good way of life. That wasn't how you wanted to be. And you start considering maybe getting out.
And I think that this kind of shows two things. One, state competition where, because of Florida, South Dakota, Georgia, that were opening and taking a lot of the money, taking a lot of the travel, the tourism, as much as Gavin Newsom and Cuomo and people like that were talking, they could see their bank accounts. They could see the fact that people are leaving their state. It's miserable to live like that. They know that deep down in their hearts. So I think that this shows that one, over time, the truth was told. And also, I hate to go back on this because I know people are like, you harp on this all the time, but I do think it's very relevant. Every time I talk to somebody that tries to make excuses for what Republicans did and how they were in on it for too long, they say maybe Trump rushed the vaccine to save us from a 10-year lockdown. Not only is that like psychotic, just like making up some fake excuse because you can't fathom that both parties are corrupt, but also it's like when you see how much money New York and California were losing, you think even they wouldn't have even stayed locked down for 10 years. They couldn't afford to because of the open states. So not only would New York and California not have locked down for that long, but this idea that Republicans would have stayed locked down for 10 years unless a vaccine, I think that's one of the fakest theories that people have been regurgitating. And I think it also kind of helps the other side because if you're, as a libertarian, a freedom fighter, conservative, patriot, even an honest leftist, whatever you consider yourself, if you're like, my freedom is in exchange for a vaccine, or that's the only way I can get my things back, then the government's going to keep putting the carrot in front of your face. They're like, even the right thinks that they need something to get their freedom back. Shouldn't the stance be just don't give it up and draw the line?
Well, that's where we should have been starting, but that was the major problem with COVID was we've stirred everybody up with this fear, and everybody is stuck in their homes and glued to their TVs and be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. And then it's like, well, how do we unring that bell and get people to want to go back out and go to concerts and go to the movies and go out to restaurants? And in the process, we destroyed so many small businesses who were forced to close and stay closed, but Walmart could stay open, Costco could stay open. Home Depot was open. So all of these big stores, Amazon, everybody is profiting like crazy because all their competition is shut down. And, the margins on a small business are so small that you can't stay closed very long and still stay in business at all and stay open. So the amount of businesses that closed, like we still haven't recovered from that. There's still the restaurant industry is still clawing their way back. And then now with inflation and everything going through the roof, I don't know how a lot of these places are surviving, but Amazon did fine, Home Depot did fine, Walmart did fine, but we just put everybody in this state of fear and then couldn't figure out how to get them back out of it. So yeah, you dangle the carrot of, oh, if everyone just gets this vaccine or everyone, just gets on board with this, but then you're incrementally giving up even more rights and saying, well, we'll give them back, you're asking for permission to have them back, but they're your rights. You didn't have to give them up in the first place, and you don't need their permission to take them back.
And I noticed that the front runner for the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, and the front runner for the Republican Party, Donald Trump, they're both trying to gaslight people into thinking that 2020 and COVID's not really an issue because he ran on I'll fix it or whatever, and then Trump obviously doesn't really, that's not his strong point. So he doesn't want to kind of relive it. But when you're talking about the fallout of restaurants, what we're facing all of the abuses that happen as far as psychologically, the kids out of school. Like this stuff's going to linger for the next 30, 40 years. And if we never forget 9/11, then we never have to. And I'm not trying to compare events because they're tragic in different ways, but there's no way that just because you like Donald Trump, you're just going to magically forget about COVID. And that's not going to be part of the 2024 campaign because he doesn't want to talk about it. And DeSantis and RFK does. I'm not buying this. Let's just forget about it because it's not a main issue. All these lingering issues that our country faces economically, even foreign policy, you best believe that, one of these countries saw an end because of the weakness that was going on around the world with lockdowns and economic shifts. I wanted to say thank you, Ira, for the stars on Facebook. I saw it. YouTube subscribers, it's going to be subscribers only commenting for like the first half. I'll open it at the end. And yeah, we're going to move on, but I want to let you get a word in there. Like the gaslighting where it's like, oh, this is not a big issue. Like, let's just forget about that because voters don't care about it. Maybe not all, but I do. And I know you do.
I know a lot of people that still care about this, and it seems to be the only people that don't want to talk about it anymore are the ones that were pushing for lockdowns and pushing for mandates and screaming at people to get in line and marginalizing and dehumanizing the people who wouldn't. And now that that's been proven spectacularly wrong, those people would like to kind of just whistle past the graveyard and not talk about it anymore. And to me, if we can't have an acknowledgement that things were handled poorly and we can't have an atonement for the way that things went down, it's just going to happen again. They're just going to pull out the same playbook. I mean, you can look back to the opioid crisis where they said, oh, they're not addictive. The FDA got on board saying they're not addictive. Doctors said, oh, it's not addictive. And then when people were like, hey, I'm in pain again, and then their prescription was, oh, you just need more. You've got breakthrough pain. I don't know if you ever saw the series Dope Sick. It's all about opioids, and they talk about breakthrough pain. What happened when they roll out the vaccine, but vaccinated people start getting sick? Oh, those are breakthrough cases. Like they don't even change the lingo, pharma. They just slap it back on the newest thing that they're pushing and keep barreling forward and marginalize anybody who won't get on board. So I do think that RFK and DeSantis and other candidates that still want to keep this as part of the election, they should, because it's the biggest thing that's happened in the last 5 years, certainly, and the ramifications of the lockdowns and the mandates, we're just starting to learn the effects of them, the effects on kids in school, the effects on depression and, drug use and alcoholism and loneliness. Like people lost connection with humanity for years, and it's hard to come back from. So I am glad that there are people keeping the conversation going because it can't just be swept under the rug and move along like nothing happened.
And that's how easy it is sometimes. You get team blue, team red, this guy, Trump, DeSantis, Trump, Biden, whatever it is. And if those two candidates decide to make it about Hunter's laptop or Trump's election, and people forget March through November, for some people, it really is that easy to be like, well, I'm going to talk about this for 3 years. And it's like, listen, what happened to us with the lockdowns, with the money printing, with all of the, Operation Warp Speed stuff, that you're not going to gaslight me out of pretending like that never happened and it's not a big issue. Maybe that'll work for other people, not me. And I don't think Pete either. We're going to talk about it more at the end because we're going to do a whole thing on RFK versus Biden. I wanted to get into this story real quick. It's North Korea was elected to the World Health Organization Executive Board. I'm going to read it and I want to get your reaction before mine because honestly, I don't even really know what to think about it. So the Democratic Republic of Korea, I guess that's what North Korea calls itself, has been elected to the executive board of the World Health Organization. The North Korean Ministry of Public Health, Dr. Jeon Min-pak, has been seated on the WHO's executive board with a term set to last until 2026. The communist state's new position on the board allows them a say in determining the organization's agenda and policy prescriptions. So what do you think about North Korea on the WHO board?
I mean, that's interesting because they've kind of been left out of everything. I mean, I think he's been trying to get into the G7 forever and expand that. I don't know enough about it though. Who else is on the board, and what kind of things are they deciding? Like I imagine the U.S. is in there. So I'd be curious to see the dynamic of what the other countries are and what the priorities are. I know there's been talk of the WHO setting up a pandemic treaty where they supersede everyone else's country governments and say we're going to take control. You're all going to agree to us. having when the next pandemic breaks out, everyone's going to do what we say so we can roll it out faster around the world. But I know quite a few countries push back against that. I don't believe the U.S. was one of them. And so that hasn't gone through yet, but I know that's been on their agenda, what they're talking about. So
Yeah.
bringing North Korea in, I don't know how that affects things. I'm not sure.
I think because I looked at, like, there were like fact checks about it and people were like, it's not true. It looks like it's like a non-binding treaty, but that's sort of how they play the game, where even with, say, Facebook, like, I would be getting censored on Facebook because I disagreed with the World Health Organization. Well, the
Yeah.
World Health Organization isn't American. It doesn't override the Constitution. And it would be like, well, we're not, this is not a binding agreement. It's not like we really do anything. It's like, well, then why is an American company censoring my accurate video based on a foreign entity of, groups that doesn't even have to defend themselves? So these are the games that they play, where they'll fact check it and say that it's not binding, which it's probably not. But if everybody in unison does the same thing, then it might as
Mhm.
well be. And like you said with the WHO, it's like they're already so bad. I feel like this will garner a lot of attention. Like, oh my God, North Korea is so bad. It's like, are we? And I'm not saying I'm glad to be an American. I don't want to go to North Korea. I mean, I'd like to visit if they wouldn't shoot me or something and play basketball, but who knows? But in general, it's one of those things where it's like, are we going to pretend like we're the America of 2014? Like, we locked our country down. We had one of the strictest policies on vaccination mandates for incoming travelers. The World Health Organization, in my view, was disastrous over the last 3 years. So, I mean, North Korea is right on brand for them. It doesn't even really bother me. It's like, at least, yeah, why wouldn't they get a seat at the table?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound terribly surprising after everything we've gone through the last 3 years, but it's just centralizing more power with a group of unelected officials that, are asking for to take sovereignty away from all the countries of the world and say, well, we're going to be this group that gets to tell you what to do. I mean, who put these people in charge? Who gets to replace them once they implement this thing? And who gets to say, well, it's non-binding? I've been in bands before where, you have to go through photo approval but it'll always be like, oh, well, I really like this picture. And it's like, well, my face is half covered in that one. They're like, just like it. We're not going to use it just to prove it. And you do, and it ends up the back of the album cover and the poster of the tour. And like everywhere you go, like there's half of your face. So it feels a bit like that, obviously on a much larger level, but it's just like, oh, it's just this. But we've been through that for 3 years. It's just a mask. It's just a vaccine. Well, it's just 2 shots. Well, now there's 3. Well, now there's 4. Well, now you can't travel here. Now you can't come in unless you have it. Now we don't like the vaccine that you got in that country. You can't come into this country unless you get the one that we're using. Like, it's all this incremental stuff where they go, it's just this, it's just that, and it stacks up really quickly. So for a group like the WHO to be throwing around ideas that are centralizing more power for them, it's scary. And I'm glad that it's out in the open and people are talking about it, but it's a little alarming that it's even in the pipeline.
Right. And I'll try to word this without getting my life ruined on social media, because I know, just like with COVID, climate change is very similar, where I try to word it properly, because I do actually believe that climate change is real. Because every time the sun goes up, the climate changes. The sun goes down, the climate changes. Winter, fall, these are climate changes. They're called seasons, right? Things shift. We don't live in a world where everything's frozen. So I do believe the climate changes. However, I do think that they are going to play the same games with that, as far as taking certain data points, saying you can't disagree with them, exaggerating, as you saw people like Rochelle Walensky go on television and say, whatever she said with her eyes bugging out of her skull, that it was going to block transmission, but I didn't really mean it. It was based off this data set. We just had this data. So if that data set or that study didn't turn out to be true when the real study happened, then is that possible with other data? Of course it is, especially on a planet that's so complex. And I would say their like huge data set doesn't go back that far, because obviously in the early 1900s, late 1800s, they weren't running around the world taking like weather samples from
Measurements.
everywhere all the time. Yeah, even you read some Canada stuff, they're saying it's the hottest thing ever, and then it's like, but there's this only goes back to like 1930, and it's like, so long story short, the same game they played with COVID, I think they're going to play with climate change, with the censorship of data, the pretending to have a monopoly on science and saying that whatever data set that they have, whether it's right or wrong, is, the new God. And if you question it, you're wrong. And they're already doing it, manipulating economies and businesses to, and
Get
then
on board. Yeah.
it's June. So when all that's happening, all you got to do is slap a rainbow flag on it, and then people don't even notice. It's like Goldman Sachs. That's the funniest meme where people are like, what was it, Occupy Wall Street? And then there's like a thing, and then all the banks have like the rainbow flag, and those same people are in the streets marching with them. I'm like, it's really that easy to fool people. Just slap a flag on it, and all of a sudden, like, it's a gay parade.
Right.
Sponsored
Well,
by
yeah,
the banks. Yeah.
exactly. And with the climate stuff, I think you're right. I think that's the next big battle that's coming. And, it seems they're intent on trotting out the consensus science again, which is ridiculous. Science isn't about consensus. It's about dissent. It's about different ideas. It's always evolving. So, if we're going to start from a place of the science is settled, the experts agree, and it's like, well, what about these ones? No, those ones don't count. We're not talking to them. Then, it's hard to have a serious conversation if that's where your starting point is.
Right. Before we move on to the next story, I want to, this is funny, mildly. A Free Beacon reported with North Korea on that topic that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is believed to weigh over 140 kilograms or 308 pounds, according to artificial intelligence estimates, a South Korean lawmaker said on Wednesday in a remark reflecting abiding interest to the health of North Korea's secretive ruler. So they're always trying to, like, obviously leaders that they can't control, people like Putin, Kim Jong-un. I'm not saying they're good. I'm just saying they're clearly like not as controllable. So they're always trying to be like, they're in bad health. They're in bad health. Now they're so desperate. I mean, obviously he's a little chunky. Sorry, Kim Jong-un, you look good, man. We're homies. We could hoop out like Dennis Rodman, hang out. Don't be mad at me. But, he's obviously a little thick, we'll say, thick boy. And now they're using artificial intelligence to try to weigh him and like take it in front of Congress and be like, he's fat, Your Honor. I know this because we've artificially, intelligent scanned him. Like,
well, it's just like we're finding new and more ways to dehumanize everybody. We have to label everybody. We have to put people in a box. Now we're going to take a photo of somebody, run it through AI and figure out their body fat index. Like, I don't know. It just seems like there's a better use for the AI, and people should have better things to do than spending their day on that. But
it shows what bullies humans can be too, because it's like, yo, AI, we could be doing like Jetsons, and it's like, no, we're just gonna be scanning people to tell you how fat you are. It's like, dude, we're like kindergartners. Like, he's fat, Your Honor. My robot said it. Like, yeah, don't you have a better use of that? No.
Yep. No, our first instinct is to bully and have clickbait headlines about stuff that you really shouldn't spend any of your day on. But oh my God.
I still want to hang out with Kim Jong-un. I just don't know if I really actually want to, because this is a good segue because it has to do with a professional wrestler too. Ric Flair was on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he said the scariest place he ever went was North Korea. They told him like, yo, you should go to North Korea. This was like back in the day. Do a show there. It'll make you a superstar. And he said that they kept him a couple days longer, and basically they wouldn't let him get back to America unless he did like a pro North Korea statement. He had to basically like do pro North Korea propaganda in order to get home. And he was like, yo, I never want to go there again.
Yeah, I read his book recently, and he talked about it in there. Like, got brought over under one pretense, and once he got there, it was like, yeah, well, now we'd like you to make this statement. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. And they're like, well, look, we extended your trip, so you have more time to make the statement. And yeah, I imagine he was super stoked to get out of there.
Right.
It's just, man. That's
Bobby
crazy.
Lee has a similar one. It didn't seem as aggressive, but Bobby Lee kind of went viral because he talked about visiting Israel, and he said, like, the comedian Bobby Lee, and he said in Israel the government like will show you around, but they make you put out like positive statements about it. So he was like, he's like, I'm enjoying myself, but it was like he was tweeting about it because they were like, tweet about it. I don't think they're as like harsh probably as North Korea. Like I doubt they're going to keep you there for 3 weeks and not send you back. But that's kind of the same sort of thing where I feel like, they need the positive PR. So it's just like, we'll give you this in exchange for this. But maybe Kim Jong-un's like, we won't send you home unless you do. Right. I do want to get back to my life. So I guess I love North Korea and it's beautiful. He's like, exactly.
Yep, I thought so.
Well, the next story I want to talk about is it's a Hulk Hogan pharmaceutical story, and I heard it. I listened to MMA podcasts a lot. I like UFC and fighting, and he was on Ariel Helwani's. It's called the MMA Hour. And when I heard it, I was like, man, this is a great story. Obviously, Ariel Helwani technically broke it because he interviewed him, but no one was really covering it. And I was like, this would be a perfect one for me to use my new streamrare.com media site that I made not just for like clickbait headlines to get clicks, but really just to break new narratives that people aren't breaking instead of just like being like an AI copy paste sort of thing. So I'll read some of the quotes that he said. He got injured. I mean, one thing I want to say about professional wrestling that I think people don't realize because they say it's fake. Yes, it's scripted, but like as somebody that loves sports, I watch sports. You could make the argument that it's more dangerous than UFC because the things that they're doing, they're jumping from 30 feet. They're really doing this stuff. It's like a choreographed hour of some of the most insane athletic ability that I've ever seen. Like I'm actually a fan now because I'm just blown away by how athletic they are. So you got to remember 30, 40 years of him just beating his body up. Dude's got so many injuries. And here's what he had to say about what they did. The doctors told him to take all the stuff. He said, between anesthesia and the pain pills and the drugs they gave me, it was about a 10-year period where I was in a fog. I didn't even know who Terry was. That's my real name. And I was just kind of like lost in this medical world of listening to what doctors were telling me to do and what to take. And I just wasn't even myself. I got to the point where I had 4 chihuahuas and I couldn't even remember the name of my darn dogs.
Yeah. I mean, that's what these drugs will do to you, though. I mean, I can only imagine the amount of injuries that he's had over the years. I grew up on Hulk Hogan, that 80s era WWF wrestling. So I was a huge fan. I've got his action figure out here outside the studio, like so reading your article about this was really heartbreaking because it's just like, that guy's been doing it since I was a kid. And these guys take a beating on their bodies. Like you said, like, yeah, it's scripted and stuff, but they're physically jumping off of that, cage or going through that table or throwing themselves out, like diving out over the ropes onto the floor. Like the beatings they take are real. And, the way that we've been tossing out painkillers for decades now, like they're candy, I can only imagine what they gave to him because those guys don't take days off. There's no off season in professional wrestling. Like you were constantly on the move, traveling, doing shows. There's no stopping. So, it for him to be on that many drugs that he's got brain fog and he's not sure where he is, can't remember his name, his dog's names, and that nobody was like, oh, we're going to taper you off of these things. Let's restart. Let's see if we can find a better way to approach your pain. It's just that's not even a part of medicine anymore. It's just, writing a prescription. You can watch these ads. If you watch any regular television, you're going to get pharmaceutical commercials. Half of them don't even say what the drug they're advertising does. They just have people going about their business and saying, boy, Zerblangatang really makes my day better. And then they go at the end, ask your doctor if Zerblangatang is right for you. And then so you go in and go, hey, should I try this thing? And the doctor's going to be like, yeah, sure. Oh, you want to try that? Here you go. No problem.
Right. And now they're starting because the only time I don't own a television, but I'll watch sports a lot. I do love sports. In the NBA finals, they're some sort of, like you said, Zerbalangate. I like that. And then it says, if you got the vaccine, tell your doctor. So, it somehow interacts with the vaccine. So you might, I don't know why, but they mentioned it. And then, like you said, they don't even really mention what it's for because they make so much money off it that maybe they don't even really have to do a normal ad. And I think I don't want to misspeak. So I'm going to say, maybe I like to be as accurate as I can. I believe that the United States and New Zealand, there's only 2 countries in the world that allow for big pharma to promote things that you can only get from a doctor. Like other countries, maybe they have big pharma ads, but it's things you could pick up at CVS, where only America and New Zealand, they allow you to promote things that the average person really shouldn't be getting. It should be for like extreme things, and they're selling it like candy on television.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is US and New Zealand. I mean, and you can go back to last year. It was really funny because there was something, and it was something about the royal family in England, but American news was doing a thing on one of them. I don't know what it was, Harry and Meghan or whoever. And so a bunch of people from England were watching it online, and all the comments were like, holy cow, you guys advertise nothing but drugs all over. Like, we don't do that here. Like, it was insane to see the amount of pharmaceutical advertising. Like, that was people's commentary on our media, which is like, wow, we don't have that in this country. And every commercial on this thing is Pfizer or Moderna or sponsored by, this drug or that drug. And it
It's
was just
gross.
shocking to them. Yeah. Like,
It's
but
gross to watch, it's gross to see, it makes you feel gross, it makes you feel like you're sick, it's manifesting sickness in people, I believe, where it's like if you have little issues, it's just like, I feel like dirty, like I need to take a shower every time I watch the commercials. That's how disgusting it is. I wanna read the second part and get your reaction. So, here's just a few more. I wrote this myself, so it's took me like 10 minutes. I'm trying to make sure I get exactly what he's saying accurately. But he said, I decided to walk this thing backwards and back away from the pharmaceutical drugs that these doctors keep prescribing me. Said Hulk, he mentioned that they were like, I don't need this. And they'd be like, yeah, I do, like kind of pressuring him or telling him that it's good for him. And then he said he got off. He feels better now. And this was his take because he's involved in some sort of CBD thing. And although I know he's like involved in it, to me, this didn't sound like a sales pitch. Like like this was like a real life story. And he was like, this is why I'm getting involved in some sort of alternate medical thing because it hurt me, the regular stuff. He said there was this whole new fight with the same energy to go ahead and help other people like me that were in this revolving door of this pharmaceutical world. And there is a better way to live. There's a better way. There's a healthier lifestyle to get clear and not have that brain fog and just feel good again. He said, I'm 69 years old and I've been training every day and I feel like I'm about 25 or 30. And it's all because I made the slow walk backwards and made that transition away from that pharmaceutical stuff to where we're at now.
Yeah, and I think more people are taking that approach. I think, while in this country we are bombarded with nothing but pharma everywhere, like, oh, there's a drug for that. Oh, you got your legs restless. Here, take this. Oh, that's going to make you sleepy. So here, take this. Well, now you're having trouble sleeping. Well, then take this. It piles up and nobody's paying attention to, does this drug interact with that drug? Like, we're just writing prescriptions all over the place. So I think I love that he took it upon himself to say, I'm going to taper off all of these drugs I'm taking. I'm going to go back to just working out and doing things naturally, and to be able to see the results for himself at 69 years old and be like, no, now I feel young again. Now I feel good again. Sounds like he was taking all these medications, whatever they were, for at least a decade or more. And so I applaud him that he's getting off of these things. Like, I mean, we take the largest percentage of pharmaceuticals are consumed in the United States, or of the whole world. Like, it's really crazy. And it's not, we don't have good health outcomes here. We don't have the best life expectancy. We don't have the best healthcare system, as much as we like to run around and say we do. So if our results are worse than everywhere else in the world, we need to start looking at something. And to me, you start looking at pharma.
Right. Well, this is like the perfect kind of intro to the next one. Before I get into it, because we're going to talk about this for a while, I want to say, for the wrestling fans out there, Hulk Hogan, they asked if he'd come back, and he said that he plans to come back. He's not ready yet, but because he's feeling so good, he wants to get in the ring one more time and do an official retirement thing. So he should be back.
He should. Yeah, Ric Flair was here in Nashville last fall and did one of his. I mean, he's like kind of like the Kiss of retirement tours. They've been retiring since '97, like on the farewell tour. But so he's done a lot of these. But he did one here in Nashville, and 73, 74, something, was out there doing it. So no reason that Hulk can't do the same.
Yeah, he should be back on this trajectory. And with the pharma stuff, this really bothers me, and people don't understand it because they're so bought into some sort of political narrative that they think I'm being hateful, or they don't like it. But like, people don't, it's, I guess the best example I could use is, even though I'm in a conservative county in California, and against LA, it seems well, at least during lockdown. So now it's fine. But like, it seems so free because I'm comparing it to Los Angeles, which is like a zombie apocalypse. I'm like, this is great. Then I do a show in Sturgis, South Dakota, and I'm like, wait, I'm still living in slavery over there, because everything's comparison. Orange County compared to LA is night and day. But then South Dakota during the lockdowns to Orange County was like, I don't even want to go back. I was literally looking at houses in South Dakota. Why am I going to wear a mask or not even wear it, get harassed, get kicked out of places? You know what I'm saying? Like, lose community members over this. So it's the same thing with America. People don't realize that big pharma has swallowed up our entire country. Like you said, I don't know the exact statistics, but it's almost like America's 5% of the world, roughly at one point, taking 85% of the pharmaceutical pills, something along those lines. It's that bad. CNBC reported something like that. So people don't realize where it's like they got this Trump versus Biden, and you got, Biden's an 80-year-old puppet who can't even speak, and Trump is a, 80-year-old guy running around selling Johnson & Johnson family on his rally, hanging out with Lindsey Graham, selling vaccines is the greatest human achievement. So it seems like I'm being hateful when I'm like, he's passing out McDonald's. He's like, it's so funny because he's fighting the left. But in reality, we're caught in this big pharma disgusto world that most of the rest of the world, although I'm not envious of some of their other positions, are looking at us like, this country is insane. The television they're watching is insane. No matter if you watch CNN or Fox News, they're pumping pharmaceuticals down your throat. Trump doesn't care. Biden doesn't care. They're both funding these people. They're both helping these people. And I want to say this is an overlooked angle of it. Big pharma swallowed up the television, swallowed up government, is swallowing up the medical industry. They're swallowing up the food supply with the Bayer-Monsanto merger that happened during the Trump administration. So when you give $18 billion or $16 billion to big pharma during Operation Warp Speed, that's socialism. And also that's corporate socialism. It's even worse than for people. But that's now empowering this people. So when they start beating you over the head in every other sense of life, and the Republicans throw their hands up and they're like, well, we didn't do this. Well, you gave them the money to do it. And that's what people don't understand, because they just want to desperately believe in Trump like he's Jesus Christ, or they just see the Trump versus Biden paradigm. And it's like, pick the one that's better and vote for them. That's fine. But wake up, because this country is not being made great again. We're fatter. We're more addicted to pills. And I'm not blaming people. The food supply is disgusting. It's been tainted, swallowed up by big pharma, and they don't give a crap about you, your family, and Trump doesn't care. He's not going to fix it. He had a chance, and he hired pharmacy lobbyists to run HHS and a pharma swamper to run FDA, who ran off to Pfizer. And RFK is telling the truth about it, and DeSantis hired a better person, but people don't care because they see it as like a this versus this, so they're not willing to fix it. And this is a number one issue for me, and I'm not caving, because if you care about economy, well, economy is more important. Well, the economy didn't exist for a year because big pharma swallowed up both sides of politics. So you're not going to have these things if we can't address this issue. And the health of our country is the wealth of our country also, and we're not healthy because of it. So I'm crazy passionate about calling out the big pharma stuff, and I'm not blinded by my worship of any politician. I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and like you said, you've got the $18 billion, whatever, up front to fund Operation Warp Speed. So that's taxpayer money. But then when the vaccines come out, the profits are all going to the manufacturers, and they have no liability whatsoever. So it's like, we are paying up front to develop this, then we're paying them to take it. And they're, all the risk is on us, all the reward is on them. And everybody in politics seems just fine with that, because everybody's getting paid. You'd be hard pressed to find anybody out there that's not taking some sort of pharmaceutical money, I would imagine. And so it is hard that that's where we're at, and that our health outcomes in this country are that poor. But
Right.
You're right. The division of, it's Biden versus Trump, it's a rematch, like it's a fight night or boxing. That's distracting us from real issues that I'm glad that like RFK and DeSantis and other people are talking about, instead of just the fight, like, the rematch, that's all we care about. And it's like, no, there's people out here who actually want to talk about things that would matter to you, instead of just going, well, I'm going to fix it, or well, I'm going to fix it. And nobody's going to fix it.
And that point is important for people to understand, because I feel like I'm swimming against a sea of like 99% influencers that won't tell the truth about this. We understand, obviously, especially Pete, understands that the left and the Democrats were the worst ones when it comes to mandates. We're not debating that. But also giving $18 billion to big pharma, and then buying 100 million of their doses and giving them all this upfront money that they have no liability for. Republicans did that, and that's still socialism. Socialism isn't necessarily just a mandate. That's part of a system. But when you look at the definition of like free market capitalism, and that this is not free market capitalism. The Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, they didn't raise all the money themselves and sell it to the people and you went and bought it. It was free because it's not free. It's all taxpayer funded. It's all taxpayer bought. And Trump was in on that. That's socialism. That's corporate socialism, the worst kind. for the worst industry, and he's proud of it and he's shameless about it, and people give him the pass because of this fake fight night. Like you said, well, it's like, well, he did this and he did this, and it's like, it's so, the one example that Owen Benjamin would always say, and I think it's a really good one, where it's like the Harlem Globetrotters. It's like, the Harlem Globetrotters play the Washington Generals, and they travel the country and they lose every night because the show is that the Harlem Globetrotters win. The Republicans are like the Washington Generals. They're just there to lose. They know what they're doing. You just don't know what they're doing. It's like, that's the dynamic of the big pharma scheme. It wasn't like the right was really trying to help you. They're the Washington Generals. They're there to lose. They teed up the left to slap you with a stick, and then when they did, they said, we didn't slap you with the stick. We just gave them the stick, built it, funded it, told them how to do it, and gave them a YouTube tutorial on how to do it. But we didn't want them to do it. We just told them how to. It's like,
Yeah,
okay.
it's the theater of division. It's like, oh, we've got oppositional parties. And it's like, we really don't. We have one uniparty that likes to have different characters, and we'll swap them out as necessary to keep you involved, like a new season, like we need new characters. But the only person in March, April there of 2020 that stood up in Congress and said, as they're passing this giant $4 trillion spending bill, and said, this is a terrible idea, it's going to lead to inflation, was Thomas Massie. And then Trump tried to run him out of the party for it. Like, oh,
Right.
you can't stand up against this thing. And now where are we at? We're in inflation. We're like, all the things that Massie said have come true, but everybody else was on board. Everybody was
Right.
like, yep, push this through, because all of their donors were going to get rich. I mean, this money was flying out the door, and a lot of it was not even, there's no accountability on it.
Right.
And now we're in this situation.
And we're about to talk about RFK versus Biden, but one thing that I find interesting at this point, I don't trust any politician. I'm skeptical, but I do also want to like humanize it, where I'm like, I understand nobody's perfect. I don't expect them to be, but just don't lie to me. Like, don't gaslight me. Tell me the truth. Show me that you have a soul. And I think that RFK's done a good job of that. And even DeSantis, where people are saying like, he did this in Florida, he locked down for too long. Here's the difference between Trump and DeSantis on that. I'm not denying that. I don't think DeSantis did a perfect job, but he's gone on multiple times and said, I didn't do the right thing. He goes, if I knew what I knew now, I was believing this data from March until May. And he's like, and in hindsight, I wish I wouldn't. And we need to talk about what the mistakes we made. Like, he's willing to acknowledge that, just like Tucker Carlson's willing to acknowledge that he was a part of the problem. Just like RFK is very thoughtful when he answers questions. I can't trust somebody like Donald Trump that won't even admit that. So yes, DeSantis made mistakes. Yes, Trump made mistakes. The difference is DeSantis is man enough and honest enough to sit there and be like, I wish I didn't do that, and we shouldn't have done that, and we need to talk about it. And Trump's like, Cuomo, it's like Charlie Crist would do a good job in Florida. Florida's a bad place to live and retire. Like, he's a total gaslighter now.
Yeah, like I don't understand his strategy or what he's going for. It seems really haphazard right now. But yeah, I do like that DeSantis will own up and be like, yeah, I wish I would have done that different. And yeah, we could have done things better. And I hope we learn from it. And especially somebody like RFK that's out there answering hard questions and, taking an interview with anybody. And I think he's polling so well. His favorabilities are above everyone else right now. He's the most popular politician in the country, as far as like the favorability polling, however that works. But he is speaking to everyone. It's not a us versus them. It's not the politics of division. He's looking at the whole picture and saying, here's what I would do different, and here are the things that we need to be talking about. And I think the more that people listen to him, the more that they go, oh, I like what he's got to say, or I like the way he says it. I'd like to hear more from him. And I think it's intriguing in this environment where the DNC has already said, no debates for Biden. We're just going to sail right into, he's the nominee. And I think RFK polling this well is really putting pressure on them to rethink that. Because I don't know how Biden shows up at the end of this as a viable candidate if he's just ducking everybody along the way. You're not the heavyweight champion if you won't take on any contenders.
I want to let people know on YouTube now, I said I'd open the chat at the end of it for non-members and stuff. So the chat's open now. This is what I'll say, and we're going to talk about this a lot because I really, I know people are like, he's a Democrat. He believes certain things. He's being very transparent about it. He's answering questions. I actually, because I want to interview Trump, DeSantis, RFK, ask them all good questions. I hit up like RFK's podcast on Instagram. messaged me right back, said, here's the email. I haven't emailed it. So hopefully I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get a conversation with RFK and ask him whatever I want. But on that note, I guess, you know, I wanted to say this real quick with the debates, because I always want debates. I want to see them happen. Usually, like in 2016, you had debates on both sides because neither person was the incumbent, right? Everybody's
Mhm.
like, Obama did 8 years and then it's done. New Democrats, new Republicans. In 2020, Trump was the incumbent, and there was some guy running named Joe Walsh who was like a former I don't know, like a Tea Party guy who now just miraculously sounds like MSNBC. You know, in my view, kind of a total phony, but he ran against Trump and Trump didn't debate him. He was polling low. But I'm wondering, like, do incumbents usually debate? Because I know if there is no incumbent, you pretty much have to debate. Like with Trump, it would be crazy if he didn't show up to that debate stage because he's no longer the incumbent and he's vying for the position. But with
Yeah.
Biden, I think he could get away with saying like incumbents don't really debate. The difference is, I think there's never been someone, I think, and I don't fully believe polls, but he is polling at 20%, which is higher than at least most I've ever seen for versus an incumbent. So RFK is a different breed of competition that I don't think they've had. And do you think he has a chance? I mean, I really hope he could beat Biden. That would be amazing. I just don't know. You know, it's a tough road to climb.
I think he has a chance to really garner. I mean, he's already garnered a lot of support. Can he make it through the DNC? I don't know. I mean, they were really good at getting rid of Bernie twice, and they certainly don't like RFK. But I think if he can keep building this momentum, he can't be ignored. They can't keep trying to marginalize him and say he doesn't matter. As far as the incumbent and the debate thing, to me, I just want some consistency, because there was plenty of people in 2020, from the left throwing shade at Trump, going, oh, look, they said no debates, no primaries, like he's our candidate and we're going with it. And then everyone was crying foul, and that's not democracy. And then now we're turning around and doing the same thing on the left this time around. Like, Biden's the candidate. No, we don't need debates. We're not entertaining anyone else. He's our guy. So I would just say, let's have some consistency on it. Or, again, it's just theater. It's just political theater. And it's always good to throw mud at the other side. But then when it's you, it's like, oh, no, we're great. We're fine doing this. So.
Right. Two things with the primary of the Democrats. What I learned, like, and people don't realize, and it is what it is, but when I was pulled into the Bernie versus Hillary, I really had no concept of conservative or liberal. These are words that meant nothing to me. I just was like going by the energy of it. And it was the fact that I saw the media was cheating Bernie Sanders, the system was cheating Bernie Sanders, all the same things that I felt like were happening to Trump after, which helped me gravitate towards him. But when Bernie was running, there's something on the Democratic side called super delegates. So when you vote in a state, there's the delegates that go because the people voted that way. And then there's these super delegates that just vote for Hillary over Bernie, whether the people do or not. And the Republican primary does not have that. That's not a thing in the Republican primary. So the Democratic primary on paper is more rigged than the Republican primary. And you pretty much have to win harder than you normally would because you have all these delegates that just listen to the party. So that's what RFK is facing, even if he beats Biden in a few states, is these super delegates look into it. Obviously,
Yeah.
the system rigged against him. And then another thing is, if it was open, like, I would vote for him over Biden, but I'm a registered Republican at this point, and I don't think I could vote in the Democratic primary. So I think he has millions of Republicans that like him, millions of progressives that maybe support him, maybe some moderates. But, is he going to be able to pull the vote from Democrat voters? I'm not really sure. What do you think?
I think that he can pull Republicans. I think he's pulling from both sides. And I know state to state, sometimes anyone, or they will have open primaries, and whatever you're registered, you can vote in either one. But and some people, you can change your party affiliation day and date of voting. So if there's Republicans that feel RFK is their guy, they can change their affiliation to Democrat for the day and vote in the primary. State to state, don't, pound of salt and all. It's everywhere is different. But I know when I went to vote in the primaries in 2016 here in Tennessee, they were like, oh, do you want a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot? So you had your choice. You obviously couldn't do both. So I think RFK is opening people's eyes to a new way of looking at politics. I think we've had so much of the same. The way that Trump kind of came in like a steamroller in 2016, I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't understand the phenomenon. I was one of the people that was super shocked when he won. And I understand it better now that people were tired of the system, and they were like, look, here's an outsider. Here's someone I don't have to hold my, like, I might be holding my nose, but I don't feel like it's the typical two evils. Like, here's something new and exciting. I'm going to give it a shot. I mean, and that was one of his selling points out on the campaign trail. He's like, what do you got to lose? Which at the time was like, oh, wow, that's hilarious. That seems like not the best strategy, but he was onto something that I think the party elites didn't understand, that they were the ones that were out of touch. And he tapped into something, that there's this mass of the population that feels underrepresented, and that nobody cares about their plight or what they're going through. Everyone promises them crumbs and then takes that back as soon as they're in office. And there's always a reason why you got to get me in there so I can fight for you. And then when you're in there, there's always a reason why you can't take up the fight right now. It's just not the right time. And so I think people are tired of that. And I think somebody like RFK comes off as a more genuine human in the way that he relates to people, and the way that he talks about issues, and the way that he's willing to talk about anything. And he's not specific to one side or the other. He'll go on Fox News and talk to people. He'll go on MSNBC if they'll have him. He will go and talk to whoever wants to talk. And I think that's the kind of person we need. That's somebody who can lead, not just represent a party.
Right. And I hope he comes on the show. I mean, it looks pretty promising, and I'll ask him the tough questions people are wondering. I want to start with the positives about him. So anybody, I have to give credit where it's due, because, I appreciate when people do it to me. When it comes to a lot of the stuff I knew about vaccine liability, like the PrEP Act, and how when there's an emergency, they have no liability for side effects, injuries, or deaths, or under the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, if you can place a vaccine on the childhood schedule, now that product has no liabilities for side effects, injuries, and deaths. So I'm not saying everyone's getting hurt, and I'm not saying it the other way. I'm not, I think the truth is somewhere in between. That's why they passed the act, because people were getting injured, they were suing, and Big Pharma in the 1980s had two ways to go. Either they could allow themselves to get sued for every baby that gets injured from these vaccines, or they could lobby Congress, lobby Reagan, or threaten him, pressure him, who knows what they did, to pass this thing that says now when all these babies get these vaccines, that we don't have to pay if that baby gets hurt from the vaccine. That's what they did. And RFK has been very eloquent, educating millions of people for decades now, that once they pass that bill, the childhood vaccine schedule has gone up and up and up and up. And it's the same thing with Operation Warp Speed. Like, the Trump-Biden false paradigm of like, oh, we're fighting the other side, has people scrambling to try to like justify it and make excuses for why it happened. But the truth is, Operation Warp Speed could be warp speeded so fast because they don't have liability. If Rochelle Walensky gets on TV and lies about it, she doesn't have the same liability that they'd have on another product. If Rachel Maddow lies about it, they don't have the same liability as the pill commercials would. And if Donald Trump says it's the greatest achievement in modern history and it's not, he never has to pay. The FDA never has to pay. The government never has to pay. And Big Pharma never has to pay. They don't give a crap how many people get saved or hurt from the product, because it doesn't affect their bottom line. So all this stuff that I was able to tell people in 2020, the main reason I was able to tell people this in 2020 is because I have a friend, Lara, who showed me RFK videos a year prior or months prior, and he eloquently explained exactly what I just explained, without politics, without being too crazy about it. Oh my gosh, we're all going to die. It's like, or else I never would have believed him. There's a lot of conspiracy theorists, and I'm not knocking theories, but like people that just seem insane, and I don't believe them just because they're on the other side. But RFK never did that. He's like, I'm not against these things. I'm just telling you the truth about them. So whether people like RFK or not, or hate that he's a Democrat or his climate change things, that like he's helped humanity so much by explaining this to myself and having others, gain this information and be able to spread this to the masses. And I'm forever grateful. I feel like he's done a huge service for the country by explaining the liability laws of vaccines.
Yeah, and the way that he is so eloquent about it, like he's been in this fight for so long that, his arguments are sound. His books are all sourced and cited, and he will say, If someone wants to challenge him on these things, show me where I got it wrong, and I'll gladly make a correction. Like, he's not the kind of person that's like, I'm never wrong, I'll never admit defeat. He's like, if you show me where I'm wrong, I want to learn. I'm still learning. Like, this is always evolving. Like, he's always been very upfront and cool. And I should say, for me personally, when my story broke in 2021, he was one of the first people to reach out to me and just offer support, and, for no benefit of himself, just was very kind to myself and my family at a time where he knew we were taking a beating. And I'll always be grateful for that. But I'm still looking at his policies and listening to what he's saying. And I think he should be pressed on all these issues. I think all of these politicians should be pressed on their issues. And out of all of them, to me, he seems to be the one who's willing to answer any of these questions. And other people kind of want to, make some things off limits or memory hole it and act like the last 3 years never happened. So I'm excited to see what he can do.
And if I chop this clip up just to give context, I know a lot of people know, maybe they don't if they join. Pete's a professional musician. He was in the Offspring for over a decade, and he decided to not get the vaccine, and he got kicked out of the band and really lost his job. And also, you had like some sort of Guillain-Barré as well. So they're not even interested, even if you have legitimate excuses for it. I mean, any excuse is a good excuse, don't get it twisted, but it's like, that just shows how insanely heartless and illogical they are, that they just dropped you like that.
Yeah, well, and that was the thing that was happening at the time is, everybody saying, oh, well, we've all got to get the vaccine to protect the people who can't get it. And if you're like, oh, well, I have an exemption, I'm one of the people who can't get it. It's like, no, you don't count. We weren't talking about you. We're talking about the nameless, faceless people so we can look benevolent and good. But no, it didn't matter. And that was part of the point of me speaking out was, absolutely, no is a complete sentence. If you don't want to take this thing, don't take it. But I was trying to show that even if you had what they would call a legitimate medical exemption, people like to say, oh, well, he at least had a good excuse. You don't need a good excuse. Any excuse is good. This is a new untested product. You don't want to take it, don't take it. But it didn't matter even if you had a medical exemption. They weren't accepted. And, and mine certainly wasn't. And across the board, I've heard from people around the world saying the same things. Like, I had an exemption, they wouldn't accept it, denied. And because it was just get on board or lose everything, pretty much.
Think about this too. In an experiment, say like Moderna or whoever's running the experiment, it's like you have this group, 20,000 people, 8,000 people, 5,000, whatever. This group has this many people. This group has this many people. We test both the same way, and we see how effective the vaccine is, because that group and the control group has the same thing. If you have 50, 60, 70, 80% of a population getting the vaccine, this is now the new experiment. The first experiment was 5,000 or 8,000 people. This one's 300 million people, or if it's in Israel, it's however many people are there. And, you have these mini experiments and worldwide experiments, and the more data you have, the more real it is. So this is a more real experiment than the one they did. That's why all the data changed. But when 60 to 70% was getting it, they were like, no, this last 15 to 20, you have to get it. It's like, who's the control group in this massive experiment? Even if you're really doing this and trying to test it, it's got to be 50-50, or at least you got to allow like 20% of the population to exist. The fact that they weren't even allowing people that could prove that they, had a legitimate reason for an exemption, which is any reason, but I'll just say an extreme reason for an exemption, they wouldn't allow it, just proves that these people are full-blown psychopaths. Well, like there is no way to study what a vaccine does to a whole population if you're not allowing for a control group to even be close to the number of people who got it.
Well, exactly. And I think what most people don't understand too about like the FDA approval process and the data that they like to talk about, like take these vaccines, for example, the pharmaceutical companies run their own.
Oh no, Pete got kicked out. Hopefully he can come back. I'll shoot him a text real quick. Okay, here he is. Give him 5 seconds. He'll be right back on the screen. No, all right. That's kind of an epic. You're like, I'm gonna drop a bombshell, and then you disappear. They got him. They got him.
Yanked out of here. No, what gets presented to the FDA is, Pfizer's interpretation of their own data. They don't have to show the data. They get to go this is what we interpret of what happened. We say it's safe and effective, and FDA goes, okay, good enough for me. That's how this stuff gets approved. And who is funding the FDA and all these regulatory agencies since the early 90s when Bush Sr. made this go through is the pharmaceutical industry. Like the bulk of the funding for the FDA, the CDC, all these places comes from the drug industry. So the people that they're supposed to be, having looking down upon, they're being funded by these same companies that they're supposed to regulate. And,
Right.
so it just makes a corrupt system. They're all captured agencies. And so when you roll something like this out, knowing that's how the process runs, yeah, I'm going to have questions about that, but you weren't allowed to have questions about it. It didn't matter. It was like everyone just has to do it. But like you
Right.
said, you feel crazy.
And with this issue, right, we're going issue by issue. We understand that there's some things that Trump does better, but RFK is by far the best on the big pharma issue. He'll talk about Monsanto. I do have my questions about his climate change narrative because I've heard him. He has been pushed back against it because he said some crazy stuff in the past. And like you said, maybe he's learned, worth talking about. But when it comes to big pharma, RFK is the best. Thomas Massey is the best congressman who's backing DeSantis. He cares about all this stuff. DeSantis has proven that he can look at a problem, who is a surgeon general, fire him, and then hire an actual surgeon general, Joseph Ladapo, who's an outsider who takes on big pharma. So RFK is the best. DeSantis has proved that he can learn, evolve, and fix the correction. And Trump is terrible. He's just like Biden. Trump hired a pharmacy lobbyist from Eli Lilly, an executive pharma, a pharma executive / lobbyist to run HHS. He hired Scott Gottlieb for FDA, who ran off to Pfizer afterwards, part of the revolving door. This is not to say that Trump is the problem. The problem is the system. But the thing that people don't realize, because Trump has so much charisma and so much support, is that he didn't fix the problem. He's not going to fix the problem, and he doesn't care about that problem. He doesn't care. He knows that people will make excuses for it, or they don't want to talk about it, or they'll get involved in this fake fight or whatever. So if I don't even want to say the conservative base, but the American base, the people who care about this stuff, you got to stand firm in your values and say, Donald Trump, my vote is not guaranteed to you. And this is the problem with him. He's entitled, like Hillary in 2016. You owe me. How dare DeSantis run against me? How dare you? Just give it to me.
Yeah,
That's why it's
Yeah.
my turn now. It's mine. It's mine. That's all he says. It's like, no, you as a voter say, hey, Trump, I like you. I'm considering voting for you. But you let the pharma swamp continue their revolving door policy. You did nothing about it, and you're shamelessly proud of it. That's not good. Will you promise to hire a real FDA person to clean up the food and drug supply? Will you hire a real HHS secretary? People don't even realize, everybody talks about Fauci for obvious reasons, because he was like the television puppet gnome or whatever. But above Fauci is the HHS director. The NIAID is part of the NIH. Fauci was the head of the NIAID. That's part of the NIH, and the NIH is a sub branch of HHS. Trump put a pharmacy lobbyist and a pharmacy executive above Fauci. He has the ability not to hire or fire Fauci per se, but to put somebody above there, and probably use his leverage to get somebody else in there. But that's debatable. He didn't do it, but nobody talks like this because everybody just has like generic conversations. But the point is not to hate somebody for it. But when you have RFK, who's the best on this topic, Ron DeSantis, who's crushing it on this topic, and Donald Trump, who's shamelessly awful on this topic that isn't a forget about it topic, that's not, I don't like that, So I like that RFK is running. I like that he's challenging Biden and Trump. And I think we should leverage this against Trump in the way of like, bro, you suck at this topic. You got to get at least to the level of DeSantis, close, like hire RFK or something. Like, promise me you're going to put him at the head of HHS or FDA, or else, I just consider you just another guy, another talking head.
Yeah, this is an important topic. And I think, people at large, especially the last few years, are interested in it. And they, a lot of people have questions that weren't questioning anything 2 years ago. But now they're like, yeah, I can see a lot more of what's going on. This is something we need to fix. Like the regulatory agencies, especially around pharma, are just corrupt. So what are you going to do about it? And, I get that he doesn't want to answer that, but I think that's something that every one of these candidates should be pressed on, because I think it's a really important issue, especially in a country like ours that consumes so much pharmaceutical product.
And I think what you were saying with RFK too is like the humanness of it, where he's like, you listen to him talk, even my friends who are like way more right wing, they're like, dude, I listen to this guy and he just seems very genuine, very authentic. And even when he's pressed on his left wing stuff, he has a very thoughtful answer. And it's one of those things too that I lean more right. I'm not pretending I don't. Everybody knows my values. I've said them a bunch, but there's something called just like an echo chamber. We know it on the left. They've become unlistenable. There's nothing there. But then on the right, people don't realize they've become that too. When in general, at a certain point, you are how you act, what you think about, including myself. Sometimes I think about this stuff too much and it bothers me. And now it's my fault. It's not your fault or Trump's fault or Biden's fault. It's my fault for letting it consume me. But we're so trapped in these chambers that people think they have to act and think and do whatever Trump says and make excuses for it. And the Biden people have to fight with him and do this and do that and wear a mask. And it's like two realities that are both really stupid. And then someone like RFK, not to say he's perfect or shouldn't be challenged, but he comes through with this total new energy of like, I don't live in either of these worlds. Like Biden's a puppet. He does what Pfizer does. Trump took money from Pfizer, hired a pharmacy lobbyist. And I don't live in either of those realities. And it triggers people because it's like, well, I got to make excuses for that guy. And it's like, and eventually, guys, as much as everybody wants to live in Trump's like anal canal for 50 years or whatever, stick their head so far up it that they can't think straight, like eventually you're going to have to move on with your life and create like a new reality for yourself, because this one is not actually even that good. It's like a show that's going to end at some point. So eventually, that's something to think about for everybody, where it's like, yes, you don't have to cave on your values. That's not what I'm asking, but create a new narrative that doesn't repel so many people. And I think, I don't know if RFK will be able to pull it off, but he's got this new energy where it's like, it's not Trump, it's not Biden, it's not Republican. It's not really, he's clearly just not like a Democrat that says what they say. And it's refreshing where it's like, oh man, I don't have to live in one of these worlds. Like that's not permanent.
And that to me, that's what a leader does. They bring people together from across the spectrum, and he doesn't care right wing, left wing, whoever he's talking to humans. And I think people, after all the connection we've lost the last few years, that's a welcome thing to see come back into politics and just society in general. And I think it's okay for us to hold people accountable and ask questions, especially in the primary season. I hate when people on one side or the other will say, well, don't challenge your candidate, you're going to weaken them, for the general. It's like, well, they're going to get asked these questions eventually, and you better to sharpen them up beforehand than let them get caught off guard in the general. And maybe they can change their mind on some positions through the primaries. Maybe they learn something by being challenged on their positions, which does make them a stronger candidate in the end. So I don't believe in the, don't be so harsh in the primaries, you're just weakening the candidate. I think that's not the way that we go about, picking the best person.
Right. And to me, what I don't like is like these personal attacks where it's like they're going back 30 years. Like Brett Kavanaugh touched me in 1920. And you know what I'm saying? Donald Trump, said something on a bus 40 years ago. Like that's the type of, and honestly, how Trump's treating DeSantis, like saying all this personal stuff about him, that doesn't appeal to me. Like, show me you're going to be a better president. I'm voting for, just like I liked Trump and supported him when they told me not to, because I thought he was the better option out of the people. You're not going to win my vote with these petty personal attacks. So yeah, I agree with you where that's the sort of stuff that maybe weakens somebody or is unnecessary if it's just like TMZ gossip. But when it comes to policy, yeah, iron sharpens iron. And this idea that we just have, that's why both these parties get away with what they get away with. It's so obvious. The left goes, well, I'm not the right. And people are like, yeah, I know Biden's corrupt and old and can't speak and works for the corporations I hate and is a total phony, but at least he's not Donald Trump and he'll let me get an abortion in California. And then like Trump will be like, rah, rah. And they're like, well, yeah, I know he caved to big pharma, printed the money, increased the deficit, didn't actually do a lot of stuff, but he did a few things. But at least he's not Joe Biden, or you know what I'm saying? Or like he's not Paul Ryan, even though he was friends with Paul Ryan and compliment him after his thing, but we'll ignore that. It becomes this sort of thing where that's why nothing gets done, because no one wants to question their side and actually stand up, because they're getting knocked back and forth like a ping pong ball. It's so obvious that that's how it happens. I agree. Primaries are for challenging. Every policy from every person should be challenged, and it should strengthen them. A real leader, it'll strengthen. A liar and somebody that has no actual stance and it
It'll
has no
expose.
convincing argument, it'll expose. Exactly.
100%.
Any last words? I know you got to run in a little bit, but we appreciate you for coming on. You'll definitely be back. And thanks for the insight. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again, man. It's great talking to you.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a whole year coming out, but right now, is RFK the most appealing to you out of everybody?
To me right now, he is. And like I said, I'm still listening. I'm listening to everybody. There's certain aspects of his policy that I'd like to hear more about. Certainly aspects of DeSantis' policy I'd like to hear more about. So, it's early in the game, but I'm excited that at least there's people out there that are driving a conversation and not just spitting out talking points and hiding in the corner and hoping they can just make their way through unscathed. Because I think ultimately the whole country loses when that's what we end up with.
Yeah, listen to an RFK interview, guys. And if you haven't, I'm going to try to have him on the show and you could hear my one because I'll ask him the tough questions. I'll ask him the things and I'm sure he'll have an answer whether you like it or not. So it'll be great. Thanks for joining, Pete. This has been Thursday, June 1st episode of Dream Rare Podcast. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Pete, again.
Yep. Thank you.
Peace, everybody. Have a good one. Hey, what's going on, my friends? Just a few ways to stay in touch and support if you'd like to. The first way is dreamrare.com. We have blue beanies, black beanies, pink hats, other colored hats, freedom versus tyranny shirts, stay blessed long sleeve, God is great long sleeve, and lots of more cool items coming soon. Dreamrare.com. Check out the shop to support. Everything's made in the United States. Handpicked by me. Patreon.com/raretalk for $5 a month. You can help support me, support the show. If you haven't noticed, unlike other channels, I don't work with very many sponsors, sometimes none at all. And part of the way I'm able to do that is with the dreamrare.com shop and patreon.com/raretalk. So thank you guys for keeping this show free, unimpeded, uninterrupted. I'm forever grateful. My free email list is stayintouchwithme.com. So check the links below in the description or just type in on any browser, stayintouchwithme.com, all one word. You'll find my email list, put it in there, and it's the least annoying email list you'll ever be on. I barely use it because I don't like getting emailed every day or every week. It's annoying. So I don't do it. Stayintouchwithme.com. It helps me take back some power away from big tech. Telegram, t.me/dreamrarechat or @dreamrarechat. Due to censorship, I post all my live stream and videos there. Sometimes I have some bonus content and I try to give people a heads up when Facebook or YouTube won't. DreamRareChat at Telegram. My Instagram is @DreamRare. Thanks for everybody following there for shorter content. And DreamRareLinks.com, that's DreamRareLinks.com, has all my stuff. My podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, my music on Spotify and Apple, my Rumble page, my BitChute and Gab page. All my links are found at DreamRareLinks.com. Thanks for watching, folks. God bless you. You already know I'll be back with more content soon.